Hello, ladies and gents. Welcome to the penultimate session of our 2020 EventWell Digital Summit. I will be joined very shortly by three wonderful ladies from Event First Steps. I'll just wait for them to join me, and then I will introduce them all to you. Here we go. So just for the benefit of the audience, Elena and Elena live together. So that's why they're on the same screen. They are in the same social bubble. So for any worries about social distancing, that's cleared up. So Caitlin is from George P. Johnson. She's a creative digital producer. Elena works for Cheerful 21st, and she works all over the world producing creative events and bringing brand visions to life. And Priya works for Boulevard Events, which is a family-run event catering company based in East London, which coincidentally I'm one of the directors of. So as well as doing that, the girls have started an initiative and an organisation called Event First Steps, which is a social enterprise. And this was born out of initially when Caitlin and Elena started within the industry. They quite quickly realised that there was a huge gulf between what they were taught at their studies as students and the reality of our industry in terms of the available resources, in terms of what they were taught in their lectures, and what actually the reality is when you step foot in the industry. And they realised that not just from a resource perspective, but also some issues with having access to mental health, the issues that we face in our industry with stress and burnout, which is why EventWell have had quite a close collaboration, ongoing collaboration with Event First Steps over the last couple of years. And we've been working on how we can bridge that gap between what people are what students are learning and what they're facing when they ultimately step foot in this industry. And we're trying to address this issue whereby event professionals are ranked in the top 5 most stressed people in the world because of their chosen career. So Caitlin and Elena put on the first ever student event at Complex, and shortly after that they met Priya, who entered the world of events from a career in travel, and she noticed a very similar vein, and it wasn't just that students were underprepared, but also those people that are switching careers are also finding themselves in a position where they feel underprepared to enter the industry. So that's a bit of background on Event First Steps and how and why they started. And so to lead into some questions based on that sort of background overview, Elle, I'm going to start with you.
Hi.
How do you feel that our industry is excessively stressful, or are we just failing to adequately prepare people for it?
I feel like it is stressful, as in we do undertake as event planners or wherever you sit in the event supply chain. It is a very stressful job because it's not like working in, I don't know, something where the end product can be pushed back if you need it to be pushed back. Like the deadline is hard, and whether or not you are 100% ready, you have to deliver. However, it is nowhere near as stressful as people who are saving people's lives every day, or running into fires, or driving planes, whatever it is. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said we're not adequately preparing people to understand exactly what the industry entails, because I think one thing that we've noticed both through our own experience and from talking to people that we meet at First Steps events is that people don't really know what a job in the events industry is about. Like, it seems to be like, oh yeah, you work in events, it's very glamorous, it's very cool, you get to travel, or they don't really understand the logistics or the hard work that goes in behind the scenes. And that's potentially why I think it's perceived as being super stressful, because people think it's like a walk in the park, like living your best life, traveling and putting on really nice events. But what about all the hours you're spending in a spreadsheet or whatever it is you're doing behind the scenes? And I think we've also had conversations around linking into that is perceptions and understanding of the hours of the industry and the pay and kind of the actual, like, how it actually works. I think that's why people potentially perceive it to be more stressful, because of that expectation versus reality.
And I think it's like you have, as you said, like I talk about like live events, hard deadline, you know it's happening, you can't put it back, that's when stuff happens. And I think if you are at university, and like I was, event operations or logistics is the kind of career path that you're kind of told about. That's where there's jobs, that's what you do. And for me, I was terrible on site, really bad, and I found that extremely stressful. And I learned at that stage, I didn't realise that there were so many other jobs that you can do within the event space. So I'm a digital producer, and I would say at least 70 to 80% of my time is in the office, and I'm not on site. And so I think that when you start to, I was about to call it educate, but when people are more aware of the different positions, you can then start to see that actually, yes, at times it can be stressful. Any job can be, but it isn't like you're a doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also think that.
Sorry, Craig, go for it.
I also think that at the beginning of your career, you're more likely to put in longer hours purely because you feel like you've got something to prove, and you're proving it to your boss, your colleagues, yourself, that you are actually in the right industry. You've just come out of university, you've spent the past 3-4 years studying for this profession, therefore you feel like there's a lot more to prove. And I feel like if you're constantly working these extra long hours, you're then putting the extra stress on you, and that obviously can lead to burnout, which a lot of younger people are suffering from it in the workplace at the moment. And I think, in terms of not being adequately prepared, that also relates to things as well. So used to saying yes to things, but we need to learn to say no, or being able to sort of speak out when the workload's too much. Maybe you need to have a meeting with your manager and talk about your targets, your workload, and things like that. And I think those little details we're not taught about and we're not prepared for at university. I mean, I say that I didn't do an event management degree, but I think generally in the university world, you aren't taught, or these little things aren't spoken about in terms of how to deal with the stresses. Because you're quite right, although it's noted as a stressful profession, there are ways of dealing with it so it doesn't.
Yeah, I think this is probably a good point to make now, and that's the difference between stress and pressure, because I think often we use those two terms interchangeably, but actually a lot of the time when we say this is stressful, we mean I'm under a lot of pressure. And I think what we're saying here is, like you very well put, Eleanor, there's lots of professions where people are actually saving lives. That's a lot of pressure. But when we do these surveys about how stressful people find their careers, doctors don't appear as high as event professionals. And that's because they're trained adequately to deal with that pressure that they're going to be under. And I guess the point we're making is, look, that people are finding it as stressful as they're finding it. We can't argue with how people report in their stress levels in these surveys. It is the fifth most stressful career path, because that's what people are reporting. They're saying, I feel this stress. That is subjective, and that is a physical manifestation that happens in the body, and people feel that way. But they're feeling it in response to less pressure than a lot of other professions who are out there saving lives. And that, to me, points to a massive gulf, like we're saying, in how we're preparing people to come into the industry.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great point that you guys made. So that leads on nicely to sort of this. Priya, you sort of touched on this in terms of like coming into the industry, feeling like you've got something to prove, feeling like you need to work a lot more hours than perhaps you're supposed to, or that you have to sort of prove something to your boss, and then maybe you're missing out on a bit of that what we call work-life balance. What are your thoughts on work-life balance, and how does a career in the events industry compare to what the work-life balance that you used to have in sort of travel and the things you used to do?
So I will start by talking about my previous role. So in travel, I wouldn't, I'd go into the office, and then leave. The only time I'd have to stay late is if there was a client that came in and you had to deal with a certain situation. But once I left the building, that's it. I'm done. I'm at home, and that, it's a very different situation. But in the events industry, it's not like that. We all know that there's different deadlines. There's events that work on different timescales. You might be working with different time zones as well, clients internationally. So generally, I don't actually like the term work-life balance. And I know we're here to talk about balance in the industry, but I think because, for me, like, balance means that things should be equal, and that's not always the case. And I think, spending time at home with your family and concentrating on that is great, and that should be a large priority. Your work is your work, and it was this whole analogy about juggling glass balls and a rubber ball. And if you drop the rubber ball, which what's the word, reflects your work life, if you drop it, it bounces back and it's still a rubber ball. Whereas if you take the glass ball, which is your health, your family, your social life, your friends, and you drop one of those, that's it. The glass is shattered, and even if you do put it back together, there's still a crack in it. So I think the word balance to me doesn't sort of fit right, because I think it's relative to the individual. And I think, for example, in our sort of group as well, like Eleanor works internationally, or has done events international. I don't. I work in an office, so it's all very relative. And I think what might seem excessive to someone might be absolutely fine to them. So I think to find a perfect balance is going to be quite unrealistic. And trying to find, I think some people spend a lot of time worrying about finding the balance, which then leads to more sort of anxiety and that kind of thing as well. And I think the main goal really should be to find and I think maybe the word flexibility is probably a little bit more I don't know if suitable.
I think you've made a really good point. I love your analogy with the juggling balls. I've not heard that one before. I've heard it described as work-life integration in the past, and I quite like that word as well. And I understand exactly what Priya's saying about balance, because it suggests that, if it's not balanced, then it's out of whack in some way. And sometimes that's not the case. If you're working a bit more and you're spending a little bit less time at home, then that's sometimes all right. But that's that the balance has shifted, and that's a problem if we use this word balance. So, girls, what do you feel like we need to redefine this in some way in our industry, or
Well, I kind of like what you said about integration, because I was saying to the girls, it's another analogy, sorry, but someone once said to me that we now live like scrambled egg lives. So before there used to be like work and home, which was yolk and egg white, and now it's all mixed together, and that is okay, and it has to be okay, especially now because we are working from our dining room table. Like, that is okay. But I think there are times in your life where if you want to, your job or your hustle, whatever you're doing, is going to take precedence. But then there are other times when it's like you have to step back from work, or you can't go to that networking event because your family, your partner, something else is more important. So I think I like the word integration, because I think it all kind of mixes in with each other, and that's the only way I think it can work, especially when you're dealing with a client on the other side of the world. So you have to look at your phone when you're meant to be at home chilling, or whatever it might be. You're out social. I do it all the time. If I'm out socializing and we're at a gallery or something, but then I'm like, oh, this is actually perfect for an event that I'm doing, and you take a picture of it. Like, everything mixes into one. So I think it needs to be redefined a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's that point. I think a point of people can deal with things slightly differently. And I think we've talked about it before, about it's very easy to compare where you're meant to be, or when people talk about balance, it should be an even, 50-50 split. But like, I've got no kids, and I've got no, so for me, I can spend more time going to work-based stuff because I can put that time into it. And I think I do think the term balance is maybe wrong. I think we can all agree that it's maybe not the right way to describe it. For me, I think it's about establishing where your parameters are and what also works for you as an individual. I know I need time where I'm not social, and sometimes that can be really long, and sometimes I really need to talk to people all the time. And I think that it helps to know what works for you, because then you're able to kind of realize, okay, I don't need to be, and again, we're all friends who work quite a lot, not just for First Steps, but in our individual jobs. We're all active within the industry. And there are times where you can be like, oh, I should be, if Priya are doing a speaking thing, or maybe I should be doing that. But actually it's like, well, no, I don't need to, nor do I want to. And it's learning to kind of accept the parameters that you need to create a balance that works for you.
Yeah, it's all subjective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah, and I think, like you say, it's not necessarily about how we define it. It's about knowing that you're running your own race, and you're doing the things that work for you, and you're finding your own balance or your own integration or your own scrambled eggs. However, it's not, we don't need to necessarily get into the semantics of how we discuss it. As long as individuals, we know that what we're doing is right for us. And we don't need to feel guilty necessarily about our own work rate, and that we're not doing as much as the person next to us, as long as we're happy and healthy and balanced. So it sounds like you guys all do things slightly differently on that note.
Very different.
Which is great, but you all have a very similar understanding of the importance of balance. So how do you go about that? What advice would you give to those struggling to find their balance or their scrambled eggs?
I can't not think of it as scrambled eggs now.
You're welcome.
personally, I have found, and I think lockdown's been, for everyone, quite an eye-opening experience. You go from being relatively busy or leading your normal life to this thing where suddenly there is less to do in the sense outdoors, probably still a lot to deal with day to day. For me, in finding a balance and dealing with stuff, it has been very much accepting my limitations or the triggers or the things that cause, and maybe it is more pressure than stress, as we talked about earlier. And I can't tell you exactly what I feel all the time, but it's probably more pressure than stress. And learning to feel content with that. And I think it very much comes from, it has helped with, and we talked about this when we did an EventWell session like last month about what has worked for us, and the three of us do it very differently. So for me, I can very easily spend days in bed or choose to spend time watching Netflix and Disney+. And initially, I would have said prior to lockdown that was me not utilising time well, and it's really bad. And actually what I've learned is no, it's things that help me recuperate, get back to work and continue on with stuff. I found a really simple technique of using something called the ABC method, which is A, being the alarm, to get up when your alarm goes off, B, make your bed, and then C, being clean yourself, okay, have a shower, get dressed. And there's like a whole alphabet that you can go through different steps. But for me, those 3 steps would have been extremely helpful, because by the time I'm up and out, even if it's that I make a cup of coffee and I come back into my room, that's fine, but it gives me a bit of, it gets me up and out. And I found that to be really useful.
I think for me, it's about being honest with yourself and knowing why you're doing something, and then that in turn will motivate you to do it. And then in terms of work-life balance, like if you really are motivated to do what your task for the day, whether this is your day job or your side hustle or something you're working on, whatever it is, I think if you're honest with yourself, and again, like lockdown obviously has been terrible, but one silver lining is that it's given us a chance to stop and think and evaluate and understand this is how I work, and also it's okay that this is how I work, which can be quite hard. Like for me, I don't like to think that I can't do something, or like I don't like to think that, I don't know. It's hard sometimes to be honest with yourself, but when you are, that's when you can set your boundaries, and that's when you can achieve the maximum potential that you have to achieve something, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. So for me, just obviously sharing what I've been doing. So before COVID, I would commute into work, have a day in the office, commute home. So there was a clear definition between work and home. So, however, obviously during lockdown, these lines were a little bit blurred. So although I'm currently on furlough, I'm working on small projects, so I need to be able to divide my time. So I started creating accountability calendars with my flatmate. She's also in the events industry, so she kind of understands where I'm coming from. So at work, I mean, Mark can testify, I'm very much a to-do list. I write lists in my diary, and I cross them off as and when I do it. So I needed to incorporate that somehow at home. So these accountability calendars I put on the tasks that I like to complete each day. I've actually now upgraded it so it's by time as well, which for some people might find that a little bit excessive, but for me it was just like a natural progression. Way of getting things done. And then at the end of the day, me and my flatmate would be like, oh, so how was your day? How did you get on? And for me, that just, it, you know, we talked about knowing your own balance. And for me, that worked, and it has been working. And there's been weeks where I haven't done a calendar, and I've just left it all open, and that to me is my vacation time. And as I've been going along, like my calendars have been getting more creative. I'm using colors and like color coding things, and the creative side for me is nothing I ever had before, but it's coming out.
I also just like to add one more thing. Sorry, if I can, like about accountability, but also communicating so that people know kind of what your work-life balance is. So like you don't know, like if someone is going out on Thursday night, so we actually can't do a meeting then, or whatever it is. I think just being open and honest with people that you can trust, or even just to say, you know what, we have this between us sometimes where I'm like, you know what, actually I'm at capacity, I can't do the thing that I said I was going to do, or whatever it is. I think that communication channel.
And I think that applies the other way as well, not just in the workspace, because right now, and we had this at the start of lockdown, in that everyone knows you're at home, and they're like, oh, but I think you can't be like you're busy because you're at home. There's nothing to do, so how are you busy? And it's like, no, I'm not busy. I just don't want to be constantly replying to messages or jumping on catch-up calls or feeling like I'm not forced to have conversations with my friends. I love them, but I don't want to be, that balance isn't just with work, it's equally with friends and family. And, you know, when I was on furlough, obviously I had a lot more free time. Now being back working, I'm doing kind of normal work days. And I think it's about being able, as you say, telling people, communicating, but also setting up slight boundaries as well. To create that balance. If you're not doing currently a day-to-day job or have that routine, you can still build in barriers that allow you to kind of segment time to do the things that you want, be that, I don't know, gardening or finances or watching Disney Plus. Like you can still do that with all those things as well.
Yeah, sure. And obviously, look, we're in an industry that's has its ups and downs, and obviously we have those ups and downs as individuals. Like sometimes we feel like we're ready for anything and we can go and execute on the biggest, you know, event for Google or Facebook or whoever it might be, and we're right up for it, despite how hard that challenge is going to be. We might well enjoy it, but there might be times where we've got no energy and we're put in a position where we need to do that, and that's not going to be much fun. So I guess that leads me on to a bit more of a question, because you've outlined some really great ways of managing that balance and that sort of personal well-being and motivation in the short term and like on a daily basis. But how have you managed it sort of on a more long-term basis when you've got sort of 3-month, 6-month, 9-month challenges coming up, and you know that you're going to have personal ups and downs in your energy and your own health and well-being and your own mood, and you know that different challenges are going to come at you at different times over the next 6 to 9 months or whatever it might be. How do you think about that?
I actually, and I would say that the way that Pri talks about her accountability calendar, but as in structuring the time. So for me, with like work stuff especially, I'm currently working on an event which is February next year. So typically I'd be working on projects that do have quite a long time period, and there's a lot of stuff that gets thrown up into it. So I find that segmenting days or sections of hours to work on stuff is a really beneficial way for me to balance kind of the different workloads and projects that might be coming in. Also, I'm a big believer in regular breaks. If I was in the office, it would be tea breaks. When I'm at home, it's not as many tea breaks. It's a lot quicker to make a cup of tea in the house than it is in the office when you can't chat to people. But I think it is about having a structure of some sort that works for you. But then also, I think it really does come down to communication. I'm quite content in raising when potentially I'm feeling slightly overwhelmed with the amount of work I have on. And I get it quite a lot. I think certain projects, when I'm thrown something I haven't done before, I find that a lot more stressful, but it probably is just that I do feel a lot more pressure and things take me longer. And I have learned to feel comfortable in raising that with kind of line managers or people I'm working with. And that's helpful. But that's because I now know what works well for me and actually when I need to speak up on stuff.
Do you think a lot of that comes down to as well that you have the confidence in yourself and your performance, and over time you feel that you've proved yourself, so now you can feel comfortable when you're not feeling up to it, or when you're feeling a bit burnt out, you know that your bosses see you in a light that's, you know, good work ethic, delivers, reliable. And actually today I'm not feeling up to it, and I feel comfortable because I'm confident in my performance in the past. I'm comfortable with saying that to my bosses. Do you think that's got something to do with it?
I think it probably does, because and I've worked at GPJ now for about 5.5 years, so I have in different roles, but yes, I've been able to kind of build up a rapport that allows that.
Yeah, and I think even now, if one of us was starting a new job, we might feel that we don't want to say no because we don't want them to think that we have shit work ethic or that we're work shy, or that we don't understand how the industry works. And I think especially when you are potentially, you know, as Event First Steps, we speak a lot to obviously people that are coming into the industry. It does come with confidence and it does come with time. But I think that is a stigma that needs to change within the events industry, because the reason that you come home from an event being on site, the come down, like everyone loves being on site. The reason there is a come down is because you have to be on 24/7, and we love it. We buzz off it. That's why we do it. But it's also like, no matter how you're feeling, you have to be like, yeah, good morning. How are you? Like, even if you are feeling like trash. And so I think the stigma around that needs to change. And also the same applies when you're even in the office, like not even out on site, not even delivering an event, not even building, whatever you're doing. And I think it's just about communication and talking about it. And that's why EventWell is so great, because no one really talks about this in the events industry. And that's why people are a little bit more afraid to talk, especially at a lower level, maybe especially if you're a woman. We've noticed that a lot as well, because sometimes we don't have as much confidence. And so, I think that plays a big part in it.
Yeah, so just to follow on from what Elena was saying, like I don't get the same post-event buzz that she would get, because I don't work on the same type of events. I'm more office-based, but I think it's very important to sort of play on your strengths. You can't be everything to everyone. You can't be the jack of all and expect to do everything well. And I think learning the art of saying no, I think, Mark, this comes back to your point of, you know, the more comfortable you are and you show your work ethic, you know, learning the art of saying no is big. It's something I'm still learning, but I'm getting there. But, you know, like Mark will testify that when I'm in the office, and he can tell when I'm like, I'm saying no, because it gets to a point where you kind of have to, in order to concentrate and do the things that you are meant to be doing well. You know, setting your priorities, concentrating on one thing at a time. Otherwise, you do end up in that situation. You're juggling glass and rubber balls, and you know, you don't want to be putting cracks into your glass balls. And I think it's very important. And like Elena was saying about EventWell, and I think, you know, it's really important to ask for support, especially in the early stages of your career. Ask for support, whether it's from your colleagues or your employer, or even just from family and friends, and just, you know, having someone that you can use as like a sounding board sometimes actually is quite a powerful thing in itself.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a big difference between being vulnerable and explaining to your colleagues or your bosses that actually I want to do this, but I'm struggling with the challenges I'm facing. and saying and coming across as like you just don't want to do it because of how you feel. And I think as individuals we could probably do better to be a little bit more vulnerable and just explain how we're feeling, as opposed to complaining about it. And also as leaders we can do a better job at seeing through that vulnerability. Sometimes when people are perhaps complaining about what they need to do, maybe they're just opening up about the challenges they're facing and a bit more empathetic.
It's just really hard. It's so hard. I can see it from both sides. And like in my past job, I've had it where I've literally said, yes, I can do it. And then because I didn't want to be like, no, I can't do it, because I can. But then realistically, what Priya was saying, like you're juggling so much, at some point it's like you have to ask for help. And sometimes this is just me, but sometimes I feel like, sometimes asking for help is, just do your job out. You can't actually manage it, when it's not that at all. It's actually like you can better do your job. Like Priya said, you can better deliver on the task that you can do if you actually say no. And it's really hard, because I feel like, especially in events, the client is always right? The guest is always right. We want to be people pleasers, and I think that's just how we are. But yeah, I think changing from both sides, like both as the employee and from the manager, like changing how we approach it.
I'd never thought about it, and the thing of saying, oh, actually, this is how I'm like feeling. So like, and I think you're right. This whole thing of like, yes, I know I can do something if I'm going to say yes. I always remember when I first started working that they'll be like, oh, can you do this? And I'd kind of automatically be like, yes, I can. And then I was like, I have no idea what I've just been asked to do. No idea. And then I would spend so long overthinking the questions I needed to ask to get the information to do the job. And I still do it now, 100% overthink things that I'm doing when I've never done it before, rather than remembering, oh no, I am skilled in these areas. I might not have done this part, but I can do it. And it just made me think of, and I don't know if this applies into the same thing of learning balance, but it is about recognizing your strengths and things. It's writing down the wins that you have, because I think it's very easy to forget what you're good at, especially when you think about long-term stuff.
Yeah.
Like, when it comes to reviewing things, it's helpful then, but just as a reminder, every so often when you're feeling overwhelmed, actually quite capable.
I think we're so good at being self-critical and saying things that we're bad at, rather than actually highlighting things that we are good at. And I think you're right, Caitlin, it's really important to just write down bits. And, it also just acts as a little reminder and be like, yes, I can do it. Yes, I am good. It's like those self-affirmations, isn't it? I am amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for vulnerability. And there's actually a lot of science behind how it breeds trust in teams. And turning around every now and again and saying, look, guys, I'm struggling with this, or I'm not feeling up to this, can I get help with this or that? It actually breeds trust within your team, and I think it's especially important for leaders to do that. Leaders that show vulnerability and show their staff that they're not perfect and there are cracks here and there. It goes a long way to sort of breeding a culture of trust and well-being in a company.
I think it's quite interesting as well in the current climate where you are, and this applies if you're obviously working, but equally everyone is so far apart, and the way that we're communicating is through tech, and with everything else going on, so we know, everyone recognises that there is many things that you have to consider and are looking out for from your family and your friends and your own concerns of what's going on in the world. And I think it's a really interesting point about sharing when maybe things are too much, because it might be that workload is a little less busier due to the current climate, but that doesn't mean that how you're feeling, that pressure, that stress, is any less. It could be more because of all the other things you're dealing with. And I think feeling that vulnerability and feeling able to say to someone, you know what, actually, I think I need to take the rest of the day off, or I'm really struggling with this stuff at the moment, and I'm not going to get that thing to you by the end of the day. I need an extra couple of hours. Stuff like that, I think, is quite helpful to be able to do right now, because hopefully that will then play into when we are back.
And especially from the top down, like we've had these conversations between us about managers that we see that do that, or people that lead their teams that do that, and the results they get versus when it's the other way around. And actually then you feel like you can't say anything, or you feel like maybe you can't just be yourself, because you're not seeing that reflected from the top down. So I think that is really, really important as well. And that leaders who do that, and leaders who show their team that they sometimes struggle, also show therefore that they understand the need for work-life balance, breathe, sorry, but and then are more open to, okay, you can work from home, or, you know, sometimes you need a personal day or a duvet day, whatever different companies call it, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's super important.
Yeah. And I feel like there's a lot to be said as well for, we touched on this at the start. A lot of the time we associate stress as a direct correlation with how much you've got on your plate. But there are people that are cut out for a lot of pressure. That's what they really enjoy that. You know, people that end up being CEOs in big companies, if you force them to go and stack shelves, or, you know, be a labourer, or do something that doesn't require a lot of strategizing and thinking and worrying about multiple different things at once, they'd probably be very unhappy and they'd be distressed in a completely different way. And sometimes we underestimate that. And like you touched on, this whole lockdown has thrust us into an environment where, you know, we all of a sudden have to think and put stuff on our own plate, because there's no reactive work, or there's far less reactive work. And we have to be proactive with it, and that comes with, you know, its own different types of stresses. And I feel like all these conversations always lead back to self-awareness. And understanding yourself.
Yeah.
Having a roadmap and a view of what challenges you're going to face over the next week, month, 3 months, 6 months, and then applying the self-awareness that you've developed to how you're going to sort of tackle those challenges.
So true.
I don't know if there's any questions from our audience. We've come to the end of our scheduled questions. So if there are, please fire away. Otherwise, what we'll do is we'll go back to table mode, and we can sit around and have a bit more of a casual chat and a conversation about things. So yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for having us.
Girls. It was an absolute pleasure. I'm always inspired to listen to you guys.
So just talk quite a lot.
It's ramble on. Clients, we just ramble on.
No, well done. It was a pleasure as always. What we'll do, we'll switch off present mode now, and we'll go back to the table.
Okay.
Nice.